Fox News Sunday. Hello again and happy Father's Day from Fox News in Washington. Here is the latest from Iran. According to state-run media, at least 10 people were killed and more than 100 injured Saturday when thousands of protesters supporting presidential candidate Mir Hossein Mousavi defied the country's top leader and demonstrated against last week's disputed election. The government made good on its vow to crack down and it called the protesters who were killed terrorists. Joining us to discuss the fast-moving developments are three experts on Iran. Democratic Senator Evan Bayh, a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Congressman Pete Hoekstra, the top Republican on House Intelligence, and Karim Sajapour with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Let's begin with those pictures from the streets of Iran. Congressman Hoekstra, what are we seeing in those pictures of the rioting, according to your intelligence sources? Is this a general uprising against the government or isolated protests? Are we witnessing the start of a revolution or another Tiananmen Square crackdown?
Well, I think that you're seeing perhaps both of those, Chris. You are beginning to see this protesting to begin spreading across Iran and growing in Tehran. At the same time, the real question here is what is going to be the response from the regime? It appears that since the Friday sermons, the intent of the regime is to be more violent and more repressive in cracking down these protests and stopping them. We'll now have to see which side is going to be more successful and how they'll respond to each other.
And Senator Bayh, according to your intelligence, what is it that the protesters want? Is this still about getting Mousavi president or a new election, or is it about a more general, broader challenge to the ruling regime?
Well, they'd certainly like a fair and open election, Chris, and there are clear indications that that did not happen. But what they really want is a better life. Unemployment is very high. I think it's about 30% inside Iran. Inflation is running in double digits. If you are a young Iranian, and they have a very young population, and you look to the future, there's just not much hope for you, and particularly for women in that society who have been denied opportunity for a long time. If you're an educated woman, there's just not a very bright future. So Mousavi is a way to achieve a better life for them. So a fair election, yes, but what they really want is more opportunity within a very repressive, autocratic society.
Let's pursue this, Mr. Sajapour, about what's at stake here. Depending on which side wins, Ahmadinejad and the Supreme Leader, Khamenei and the Revolutionary Guard on the one side, or Mousavi and the protesters on the other, what's at stake here in terms of the future of Iran and also in terms of relations with the U.S. and even Israel?
Well, first I would say, Chris, that the harrowing images of the last several days really underscore for you the brutality of this regime and the bravery of the Iranian people. And in a way, the regime could lose by winning. What I mean by that is if they continue to clamp down with overwhelming force, they're losing legitimacy by the day. And what we may start to see is what we saw in the late 1970s with the Shah, and that is that the main arteries of this regime are going to collapse. We might start to see strikes from the merchant classes, the bazaar, strikes from the oil ministry, which could really cripple this economy.
And what does it mean if Mousavi were to win? Because he is a product of he was the original prime minister with the Ayatollah Khomeini. He is a product of this regime, so would he really represent a dramatic change?
Well, what I would say, Chris, is that the Mir Hossein Mousavi of pre-June 12th is different than the Mir Hossein Mousavi of post-June 12th. I think before the elections, he took a fairly tempered, moderate approach, but now red lines have been crossed, and he's challenging the authority of the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. So I think that Mousavi and his supporters want a fundamentally different Iran than they were asking for pre-June 12th.
Let me ask you about a different aspect of that. And is this the people versus the government? Because, in fact, there are some very powerful people in the ruling regime, like Rafsanjani, the former president, who is backing Mousavi. A couple of ayatollahs have issued fatwas against cracking down on the protesters. So is this the people versus the ruling clerical regime, or are there, in fact, splits within the clerics?
What was unprecedented about this moment, Chris, is that historically we have seen the people versus the regime. Now we have unprecedented fissures amongst revolutionary elites themselves. And I think the vast majority of not only the Iranian people, but also Iranian officials behind closed doors recognize that this death to America culture of 1979 is bankrupt in 2009.
Congressman Hoekstra, now that this has, as you say, become a full-scale crackdown on all the protesters, with a number of the leaders of the protest being arrested during the week, and we gather overnight, what should the U.S. do? What should President Obama say, and what should this country's policy be towards Iran?
Well, Chris, if we look back to the campaign last fall, you know, there were those that said our president was going to be challenged in the first 6 months of his presidency. I think that's exactly what you're seeing. The president is being challenged in a very different way than what many of us expected that he would be. And I think that the president has also prepared himself for this opportunity. He's gone to Europe. He's gone to the Middle East. He's made the speech at Cairo. And, you know, what he did is he polished America's image. Now what he has to use is he has to use that new credibility and to speak out on behalf of the Iranian people. This is now about America. It is about President Obama, and it is about leadership. This is a real opportunity. This is potentially a game changer in Iran. It is an opportunity that the president and America have to leverage off of.
So be a little bit more specific, Congressman Hoekstra. What would you like to see the president do, particularly when the fate of Iran and the situation there, which side is going to end up winning, hangs in the balance?
Well, I think yesterday the president came out with a written statement that this president is a great orator. This president needs to come out. He needs to speak to the American people, but more importantly, he needs to speak to the people of Iran, the people of the Middle East, and he has to make a forceful statement on behalf of the people on the streets for freedom and democracy. You know, this is a country that very soon is going to have nuclear weapons. This is a repressive regime. This is an opportunity to get some new leadership in here, because the question with Iran going into the future is not about whether they will have a nuclear weapon or not. It is about what regime will have control of those weapons, and whether they will be integrated into the international community or whether they will be a pariah in the international community. This is the opportunity for the president to help shape this debate and get new leadership into Iran.
Senator Bayh, you have been a long-time expert on Iran, and actually a proponent for a long period of time on tougher sanctions. You've, in fact, even introduced resolutions that would call for sanctions against any companies that send gasoline back to Iran. You really want to tighten the economic screws. Is this the time to do that?
Chris, it's been the time to do that for quite some time, to try and restrain their nuclear program. So I was for that long time before this election. But let me say, I think the president is handling a rapidly evolving, very complex situation about as well as you could expect. He has put us clearly on the side of the reformers, clearly on the side of fair and free elections, clearly condemned the violence. But he's done it in a smart way, because as Kareem was pointing out, this regime is rapidly losing legitimacy with its own people. There's some polling data from other countries in the Islamic world suggesting they're losing legitimacy in the rest of the Islamic world. We should not let them change the narrative to one of being, meddling Americans, American Western imperialism, that sort of thing, because historically that sort of narrative has resonated. We might allow them to change the subject within Iran and in the rest of the Islamic world. Let's not let them do that. So we've got to be smart about this, and I think the president is being smart. So I'm in favor of tough action. But if you just go out and say, look, we're for regime change and a lot of tough rhetoric, but you're not prepared to do anything, then we look impotent, and that's not a place for a great power to be.
Congressman Hoekstra, one of the problems here is the fact that the president came into office with a diplomatic strategy, what some people call the grand bargain, the idea that he would take regime change off the table in the hopes that Iran would then agree to change its behavior on terrorism, on nuclear weapons. How much is that diplomatic strategy dead because of the events that we've seen over the course of the last week? If the Ayatollah Khamenei and President Ahmadinejad prevail, should the U.S. continue, can the U.S. continue to try to engage them diplomatically?
Well, what the president is doing, I think he's stubbornly holding on to this belief that negotiations with the current regime is the best way forward. I really think, and I do agree with Senator Bayh here, that a combination of speaking out forcefully and at the same time maybe moving forward with sanctions will bring about the kind of change and will let us take advantage, or will let the Iranian people, this is about the Iranian people, let the Iranian people take advantage of this opportunity that is in front of them. As to whether speaking out forcefully undercuts the voices of freedom and the voices of protest in Iran, I don't buy that for a minute. Us speaking out forcefully on their behalf, the regime is going to accuse us of meddling whether we do or whether we do not say anything. But if we're going to do something, we should speak out.